In this video, I'm comparing the LUMIX S5iiX and the LUMIX G9 Mark II, two of the most recent LUMIX cameras that have been released that are two flagships for the full frame and the Micro Four Third model. And hopefully by the end of the video, I can finally answer the question, is it worth still buying a Micro Four Third camera from LUMIX? Starting off with the price, you are able to buy the LUMIX S5iiX for about $2,200 before tax, and the G9 Mark II about $1,900 before tax. Now that's the real big question, is that $300 difference really worth getting a Micro Four Third camera or getting a full frame camera? Now going into the menu systems on this camera, both of these cameras are very similar when it comes to the menu systems, almost identical for the most part. What is really nice about most LUMIX cameras is you can actually save and load your own menu systems and input them onto another camera. If you are interested in getting my GH6, the S5iiX, or a G9 Mark II settings, I actually have that in the link in the description. One little gripe though is if you own the S5iiX and have a G9 Mark II or a GH6, you can't copy all the settings from one camera to another camera automatically. You have to go through it menu by menu and do it all manually, which is a little bit of a gripe since the menu systems are about 95% the exact same. Now looking at the physical body from both these cameras, they are basically identical camera bodies. They're the exact same shape, size, and design. The only major difference is obviously the sensor size. There's two function FM buttons on the G9 Mark II, and there is a vent on the S5iiX in the viewfinder area. Besides that, they're basically the exact same body, besides the LUMIX S5iiX also having that blackout design. What is really cool and potentially going to be able to happen, being the exact same camera bodies, is that you can use the exact same cages for both systems and both cameras. So if you own the S5iiX and the G9 Mark II, you can use the exact same cage between the two cameras. Hopefully in the future, once the extended battery grip comes out, that should be able to function with both cameras as well. Now, before we start just talking specs, here is a little bit of a comparison between the S5iiX versus the G9 Mark II. Right in the description in the comments below if you can figure out which one was A and which one was B. Now getting into some video specs, both of these cameras have some amazing specs on paper. Both the cameras do shoot in a open gate setting. The LUMIX S5iiX is able to shoot in a 3x2 open gate 6K up to 30 frames a second, while the G9 Mark II is able to shoot in a 5.8K 4:3 ratio. Now the 3:2 ratio is actually a little bit wider than the 4:3 ratio. So if you're wanting a specific open gate that it has a little bit more width, the S5iiX would probably be for you. But if you're looking for a full-on video feature system, the G9 Mark II definitely doesn't fall behind. With settings like Cine 4K, normal 4K, up to 60 frames, and 120 frames a second, all in a bunch of different codec options like 422 10-bit, 420 10-bit, all intra, long op, and many more. On top of that, it can shoot 1080 240 frames a second, and also a bunch of 5.7K up to 60 frames a second. But one nice thing about the G9 Mark II over the S5iiX in the video specs is that there is no crop modes whatsoever. There's no recording limits and nothing like that on both these cameras, but if you want to shoot in 4K 24 frames a second and switch to 4K 60 frames a second, you won't deal with any crop issues like the LUMIX S5iiX. On the LUMIX S5iiX, if you were shooting in 4K 24 frames a second and then switched over to 4K 60 frames a second, there is an APS-C crop. Now, while the G9 Mark II is definitely a micro four thirds sensor, that means that whatever lens you put on does have that 2x crop factor. For example, if you have a 12mm on the G9 Mark II, it'll kind of look an equivalent to a 24mm on full frame. Also, if you've been enjoying the content so far in this review video, you definitely should consider subscribing. I don't really ask it that much, but it would be really cool and mean a lot to me. Anyways, I'll let you get back to the review. If you are looking for a camera that has external recording, the S5iiX is actually currently the only option. The G9 Mark II might be able to shoot externally raw in the future, but I think they might be withholding that for the GH series. Now, with that said, both these cameras can record internally Apple ProRes, but you still need to record externally to an SSD using something like the Condor Blue top handle. Now, it is nice that both of these cameras have slow motion options, and both cameras utilize the S&Q or slow and quick settings, which allows you to automatically slow down your camera settings right into the camera. Personally, I don't like doing this between any of my cameras. I rather shoot in just the normal frame rate and then slow it down in post, because it does also record sound doing that option. Now, lastly, on the video specs and all the settings, both these cameras have true unlimited recording. With that said, the G9 Mark II doesn't have any internal fans, so if you're shooting for long periods of times and you need your camera to cool down and you're not taking any breaks, the LUMIX S5iiX would definitely be the way to go, since the G9 Mark II has no internal fans. Moving on from video specs, now comes autofocus. Both of these cameras are the first phase detect autofocus cameras from LUMIX. Both in my test and in all my shooting with these cameras perform really well. I wouldn't say if you need autofocus to go one way or the other, they both perform extremely well. Nextly, I want to talk about lenses. What's cool about LUMIX cameras using the L mount and micro four thirds mount is most other camera mounts you can easily adapt with these cameras. Now, for all of my comparison tests, I have been using the 24-70 f2.8 on the full frame camera, and I've using the 12-35 f2.8 on the micro four thirds camera. The size comparison between these two lenses is absolutely massive. Using any full frame cameras, lenses tend to be much larger, while using any micro four thirds cameras, the lenses tend to be a lot smaller. With that said though, if you're not a travel filmmaker and you're just a dedicated filmmaker making commercials or making YouTube videos or anything like that, and you don't need a lightweight camera, then it might make sense to get a full frame camera with a full frame lens. The LUMIX 12-35 lens costs around $900, while the 24-70 from LUMIX costs almost around $1,800 to $1,900. With that said though, you can get a Sigma L mount 24-70 for about $1,000. So a $900 micro four thirds lens is the same equivalent to about a $1,000 lens that you're able to purchase for the L mount with Sigma. So the gap is becoming a lot smaller and smaller between the prices of lenses. The higher quality lenses you get, the gap becomes a much smaller. And all the recent prime lenses that have been getting released with the LUMIX S5iiX, like the 35mm, 50mm, and 85mm, those lenses are definitely way more affordable than a lot of other full frame glass that is out there. So the differences in price between micro four thirds cameras and the advantages micro four thirds cameras have in lens prices in the past is slowly diminishing over time. With that said, if you're looking for a kit where you can fit 3 lenses in one lens, then it might make more sense to get micro four thirds camera, since the lenses are much smaller, especially if you're a travel filmmaker or a travel photographer. Using a lot of smaller glass and having a lot more lens options would make more sense in the field versus having one giant lens that is limited on the range. But another point I did want to mention on lenses is when you are spending around $2,000 for a camera body, you definitely already want to be investing a lot into the lenses themselves. You don't want to be getting a $2,000 camera body and only a $150 lens. It'd make a lot more sense spending $2,000 on a camera body than spending $1,000 on a couple lenses or 2 lenses or maybe even one wide range of a variety lens. And that's kind of where the dilemma comes in. When you spend a lot more money on higher quality lenses and glass, it might make more sense to invest into full frame cameras. Now with that said, since you can easily convert all lenses to basically a Micro Four Third camera, you can use any lenses and any mounts to that camera system. You just have to decide which mount you want to invest in. Let's talk about focal length and depth of field. Now, when shooting on a Micro Four Third camera like the G9ii Mark II, whatever focal length you have will be 2 times a crop in comparison to full frame. For example, if you're shooting on a 16mm, it's going to look like a 32mm. And if you're also shooting on a Micro Four Third camera, your depth of field will be double what the full frame camera is with the light of what the aperture is. So shooting on both cameras at an f4, the depth of field on the Micro Four Third camera will look like an f8, while the depth of field will look like an f4 on the full frame camera. Now, if I bring the depth of field to an f2 on the Micro Four Third camera, it's gonna look like an f4 depth of field to the full frame camera, but with the light of an f2. And when you adjust the brightness, it's gonna look almost identical between the 2 shots. Now, what makes this extremely useful shooting on the LUMIX G9ii Mark II is any tight and close detail shots with this camera. You can basically shoot on an f4 and have the depth of field looking like an f8 with the light of the f4. This makes it a lot more useful to have a lot more things in focus when shooting super close up. Now, both these cameras do shoot in true Vlog. What's nice is you don't have to purchase Vlog. It comes pre-installed into this camera. There's no more Vlog L with these cameras. It's just true Vlog. And if you want to learn how to color grade Vlog, I have 2 videos right here talking about how to color grade it in Final Cut Pro and in DaVinci Resolve. Now, with the testing I've been doing and doing the color grading between the 2 cameras, it does definitely feel a little bit warmer and a little bit more magentas on the G9ii Mark II. But these things could be easily color graded out and adjusted in post with ease. And that leads me on to the next thing, which is dual native ISO versus dynamic range boost mode. Now, on the S5iiX, there is a dual native ISO being 640 and 4000. This is really nice when you need a high ISO and you don't want to get any grain in your image. You switch your ISO up to 4000 and your image looks extremely clean. While at the same time on the G9ii Mark II, dynamic range boost mode, you don't have to turn on anymore like the GH6. It's kind of just always on, which is cool and not cool in a sense. I would rather prefer if there was a dual native ISO, knowing how the grain and how the image is going to react in a specific way when I put it at a certain ISO level. It just kind of does its thing in dynamic range boost mode, and it's a little bit more unusable if you're in low light settings. For stabilization between these 2 cameras, definitely the G9ii Mark II takes the cake. Not only the fact that this camera has up to 8 stops of stabilization in the sensor itself, but it's also able to shoot on high and standard in the electronic stabilization. Now, this doesn't mean the S5iiX definitely doesn't pack a punch. I've used this camera on a ton of different shoots and never had any issues with the stabilization, and was pretty impressed on how steady and how stable this camera is by itself. But if you're looking for a camera that can basically be a gimbal without being a gimbal, that definitely will be the G9ii Mark II. Now, finally, they answered the question, is it worth buying a Micro Four Third camera still? And truthfully, yes, but it also depends who you are. So I'm going to break down who I think the S5iiX is for and who I think the G9ii Mark II is for. Now, the person I recommend buying the S5iiX is the general filmmaker and YouTuber. Someone who is looking to get into filmmaking specifically, this camera definitely packs a punch. And it also has its advantages, being able to shoot in external RAW and being able to shoot in B-RAW. This camera allows you to slowly grow into it as time goes on. Meanwhile, the person I would recommend getting the LUMIX G9ii Mark II is 2 categories. One, the category for people who already own a ton of Micro Four Third glass. This camera definitely won't disappoint. Now, the second person I would recommend purchasing the G9ii Mark II is travel photographers and filmmakers. Someone who wants a wide variety of different lenses in their arsenal. This is really, really nice when lenses for micro four third cameras are about basically this big, and you can pack a lot more lenses in comparison to full frame glass. Now, if you're interested in purchasing the S5 IIX, I have a review video right here. And if you're interested about the G9 Mark II, there's a review video right here. Until next week, guys, peace.